Now, what does 2018 hold for Africa? This was one of the talking points at this year's Thomson Reuters Africa Summit, as political uncertainty continues to be a common theme in the continent's future. CNBC Africa spoke to Ronak Gopadas, an Africa strategist at Rand Merchant Bank.
I'm a firm believer that to understand what the future looks like, you need to take stock of current realities and past performance. So, I mean, reflecting on 2017, it's been another crazy, chaotic year. But the biggest theme that's emerged for me is this disconnect between what's happening in a political sphere and what's happening in economics and financial markets. And it just doesn't make sense because the two worlds are pretty much disconnected. So that's across the board. So you look at the US, it's basically a reality TV show, The Apprentice White House, yet the Dow Jones has kicked on and keeps hitting new highs. Turning to Africa, you look at the reaction of financial markets after Pravin Gordhan got fired relative to Nhlanhla Nene. You'd think once bitten, twice shy, but it's been quite muted. In Cote d'Ivoire, 8 mutinies this year, but they put away a Eurobond that was oversubscribed at a record rate. Kenya, 25 people died initially in the aftermath of election violence, no movement on the currency. So, you know, I'm sitting back and I'm trying to make sense of this and saying, why is there this disconnect? So, you know, we seem to be in a global geopolitical recession where governance is slipping across the board, but economic outcomes are not speaking to that, so that's a disconnect. Secondly, the real economy and financial markets are also disconnected. You know, in Africa, we don't have a single investment grade issuer of a Eurobond anymore, yet you look at the rates that they're paying on Eurobonds, it's staggeringly low. And then also, is there a disconnect between the old normal and the new normal? So those are the three things that I've kind of observed this year. And what worries me is complacency, because, you know, you look at financial markets and you think that this party can go on forever, but it's a bit like a Cinderella kind of story where, you know, your carriage can very quickly turn into a pumpkin. And when that happens, countries with bad economics and bad politics are going to be badly exposed.
Right. And is this exactly what you see happening in terms of the catching up process? So is it the financial markets that will catch up with the political realities, or will politics catch up with what's happening in the financial markets, which actually will make for a much better outcome?
So I think at the moment what we're seeing has been driven largely by external factors. So it's a global search for yield. It's the fact that we're kind of risk on emerging markets. So a lot of the domestic deficiencies that we're seeing means that, you know, they can largely be ignored. So countries with bad politics, Zambia, de facto states of emergency, countries with electoral violence and, you know, persistent election cycles, that stuff is being swept under the rug. But if, for example, you get a quicker than expected Fed hiking rate cycle, or you get another China growth wobble, then your political issues are magnified because the external tide has moved against you.
Most definitely. Now, Ronak, I know that you are one of the guys who have been following the Kenya outcomes or the Kenya elections very closely. You were taken by surprise by the initial Supreme Court ruling that nullified the elections. Again, taken by surprise by the opposition party leader Raila Odinga. They're pulling out of the race. How do you see the end scenario of the situation there in Kenya?
So, I mean, I was chatting to a friend about it, and he said instead of keeping up with the Kardashians, it should be keeping up with the Kenyans. Because, you know, really, it's very unpredictable, it's very chaotic, and as you know, that's stuff that investors don't like. They want clarity, certainty, and an environment where they can invest their money where the rules of the game are clear. Now, you've got an election cycle that's persisted for the better part of this year, uncertainty legally, uncertainty around the legitimacy of the current president if he contests uncontested. What's going to happen? Is the election on the 26th going to go ahead? And whilst the country attempts to navigate all of these factors, it means that the economy is kept on the back burner. And that's never a good thing, right? So they've got very urgent priorities fiscally. Growth is gonna dip. They've got the interest rate cap, which has crimped private sector growth. So all of these things are delayed, and that policy vacuum means that people are adopting a wait-and-see attitude towards Kenya up until this election cycle is settled and a line is drawn under the matter.
And how do you see people's positions regarding the elections that are coming up in South Africa in December? So that's also been going through a lot of transitions that people didn't expect. Right now, it looks like we've got Zweli Mkhize, who's being punted against Cyril Ramaphosa as the possible new president of the ANC. What is your view of the South African political scenario and its standpoint for 2018?
Geez, you're asking me to be a corporate sangoma here. So look, in politics an hour is a long time, and I think the situation is very fluid. Things are changing quite a lot, but what we've got is effectively a radical economic transformation candidate. We've got a reformer candidate, and then Zweli Mkhize is emerging as the unity candidate. And I think, you know, what was significant is that the branch numbers came out this week, and it appears more and more that Mpumalanga and David Mabuza are going to become kingmaker for the December conference. I think, you know, regardless of the outcome, again, the economy has been effectively at a standstill for the past few years. We need urgent policy reform. And the big question mark that I'm asking is who is going to be able to deliver quick, snappy reform and get investors and investor sentiment on board, because our economic challenges and priorities are extremely urgent.
And your view on Zimbabwe, I mean, big elections coming to the fore there next year as well. How do you see that playing out, and what is the outlook there for the Zimbabwean economy?
So, I mean, the Zimbabwean economy is contingent on the political outcomes, and you know, for as long as President Mugabe is fit to remain in office, I think, you know, the status quo will remain. The big issue, like in many African countries, is around succession. Two frontrunners, Emmerson Mnangagwa and his wife Grace Mugabe. You know, key for any successor is to have the military on board, and I think in that regard, I would definitely put Mr. Mnangagwa as the front runner. But again, no silver bullet. A change in leadership and a leadership transition is always raises eyebrows. Whether it's done in a smooth way or a chaotic way, whether the policy orientation shifts, those are the big questions that people are going to be asking. And again, I think a wait and see attitude is going to be what investors take to Zimbabwe.
Well, Ms. Grace Mugabe, I certainly won't agree with you there. She has referred to the opposition leader there as being, or not rather the opposition, the deputy president of Zimbabwe as being a nothing, in quote. But bringing it back to the theme of the conference of what brings you here, we're talking about disruption being the answer to empower Africa. From a political point of view, what dent do you see a technological change in this digital era playing in politics, or nothing on the radar right now?
No, I mean, there definitely is scope for technology, because what we've got in Africa is an old guard of leaders, guys who kind of, you know, were born long ago, the facelift generation against the Facebook generation. That's what people are calling it, because the age gap is around 40 years in Africa. So, you know, I think technology, social media has the potential to create a more active and engaged citizenry, demand greater accountability, better governance, and all these kind of things. But you need a cohort of leaders who's going to be responsive of that. And typically the reaction to this open culture of millennials and young people has been kind of button-up culture, rooted in military kind of loyalties and that kind of thing. So you've almost got this clash of cultures and backgrounds, and how Africa reconciles that going forward is going to be interesting because of our demographics, which can either be a big boon or a massive disaster. And I think technology is going to be instrumental in hopefully creating better governance, more engaged leadership on the continent, which is what we really need to deliver.
That was Ronako Padas, Africa strategist at Rand Merchant Bank.